Welcome to our celebration this November 16th of the 101st anniversary of the birth of my father, Gus Zuehlke Sr. The last 2 years, I've celebrated this wonderful occasion at the Paper Valley Hotel in Appleton, Wisconsin. This year, I celebrated in my home of South Bend. I'm here with his grandson, my son, and he's helping me with the live stream, Philip. And this will be the third lecture I give on banking on the common good, which is a book I'm working on, writing about my father's vocation to the common good during his lifetime of 87 years. He died in 2009, and we were able to hold 2 memorial live stream celebrations in his honor, but we weren't able to have the kind of event I would have liked due to the pandemic. But the celebration went on anyway with the live stream and the sharing I gave. The first sharing I gave was entitled Banking on the Common Good, and the subtitle was The Legacy of Gus Zuehlke Sr. as a Remedy for Our Times. And I gave it another more important subtitle, A Dialogue of the Heart between a father and a son. The next year, I gave the next talk. It was entitled Banking on the Common Good, The Quest for the Compass. Tonight, we're going to look at banking on the common good and my father's growth away from war and toward peace. Because of what I consider to be the relevance of his journey, especially near the end of his life, as he grew in the virtue of peace. People who knew my dad knew him as a bridge builder. In fact, that was his most important first public activity beyond the bank, was fighting for and articulating the need for the East College Avenue Bridge, which bridges the east side and the west side of Appleton. It's hard to imagine that there was opposition to the building of that bridge in the late 1950s, but sure enough there was, because once that high-span bridge was built, it became an integral part of the city. And it's almost ironic that in 2009 they started a construction project on it. The bridge was closed until, I believe, later in 2010, and the bridge was completed then, and it's now 4 lanes instead of only 2. But it was my father's strong efforts in the late 1950s that made that bridge a reality, and I see more in a bridge than a bridge. The gift of building bridges beyond engineering here is also a gift to build bridges between people, especially people who have differences and need to link with each other to advance the common good. So the other bridge that Dad was good at building was the bridge of loans on homes. And he had that mortgage policy at the bank that he never foreclosed on a home where a family was living. And this, of course, is very, very remarkable and important. he respected the sacrosanctity of the home in the face of those who would like to monetize everything. He knew that there were limits, and he enforced those limits in terms of mortgages out of the bank. One of the other aspects of that mortgage policy is that an entrepreneur could not mortgage their own home for the sake of the entrepreneurial activity. If they owned a second home, they could use that as collateral, but not the first home, because the first home belonged not primarily to the entrepreneur and his business. The first home belonged to the entrepreneur's wife and children, as well as the entrepreneur. So it was important that the sacrosanctity of those kinds of loan contracts were upheld. And indeed, I believe it made for a more stable and clear-sighted society in Appleton in the 50s and 60s, you know, even on later. The thing that I want to reflect on further, though, tonight is talking about my dad's experience of war. Now, this gets into an aspect of history that we don't often talk about, but it's pretty remarkable that he got the Bronze Star Medal for valor in the Battle of Saipan because he came into the harbor early and he got the Marines on the beach something they needed off of his LCT. He was the commander of the LCT. And what happened was he had to pull out back into the harbor under enemy fire, and the Marines recommended him for the Bronze Star Medal for what he had done. And he got safely back into formation. And of course, when he first went in to the harbor, his commanding officer broke radio silence to tell him off, to tell him that what he was doing was wrong. But he just plowed ahead and got the Marines what they needed and got out of there and got the Bronze Star Medal for valor. And so over the years, that became one of the things that people came to know about my father as time went by. But most of the time in the war was not battles. Most of the time in the war was sitting, and he had to be away from his crew because he was the officer. And so he did a lot of reading, and he would go to the bigger libraries on the bigger ships, borrow books, and read them. And he read all kinds of books during his time when there wasn't anything else to do. Somebody else was steering the boat, and my father was in his cabin, and he told me he got to read all these books that he wouldn't have been able to read even in college. And so it was a way he was furthering his education. But beyond that, he was participating in that mystery of what reading really does for people. If you think about C.S. Lewis in the screenplay or the play Shadowlands, the movie Shadowlands, what did he say about reading? He said, we read to know that we're not alone. Or if you think about what Proust says, is reading is that fertile miracle of a communication effected but in solitude. So the solitude was creative solitude. The stillness was broken by the word and the words that he was reading. And indeed, so part of war for my father participated in what you might call a profound inner peace. The ability to be composed and to read what other people had written, how they had composed the written word of the books he read. So this went into my father developing his moral compass. And in the second talk last year, we talked about the quest for the compass. And we recognized that there were factors that go into the building of character and the development of a compass, a moral compass. And we saw how the common good and the ability to relate to people, we called the common touch. And we also talked about the respect for common humanity. Those were all aspects of what my dad had as banking on the common good. Banking on the common good, too, is an idea like, what does it mean? Well, in a way, to bank on something is to lean on it. And we bank on and trust people that we lean on. Well, if you're leaning on the common good, you're actually leaning on a gift of God. And there's a way in which you can think about God as the uncreated common good of the universe. So banking on the common good comes down to trusting in providence, trusting in the way that the universe is actually designed, and corresponding your actions to the truth of the way God created nature. And that was very important to my father. So you see, so he comes back from the war and he establishes his career. Over time, he ends up being president of the Appleton State Bank at a very young age, in his 30s. He's a member of Young Presidents Organization, and one of the other young presidents that he was in the Young Presidents Organization with was a young Catholic priest who was running a university in the Midwest known as Notre Dame. He was in Young Presidents Organization with Father Theodore Hesper. So my dad shared the experience of being a young executive with Father Ted. Well, beyond that, over time, the rest of a lot of the history we covered in the previous talks. We talked about my dad and the work he did with John Bergstrom to develop the Paper Valley Hotel, all the adventures of running the bank corporation known as Valley Bank Corporation, the other charitable works he did, including running the St. Elizabeth's Hospital for a time when they were between managers. And he also worked extensively with the Bay Lakes Council of the Boy Scouts and received the highest award you could get for being a helper with the Boy Scouts. It's called the Silver Beaver Award. And he continued to serve in many different ways the common good of the area. As it turned out, the last project for the common good that I'm familiar with that Dad donated to before he died in Appleton was the Performing Arts Center. And just recently, a friend of mine from high school sent me a picture of the Gus and Helen Zuehlke coat closet, which has been dedicated to the memory of my parents in the Performing Arts Center. He's seeing that, he was volunteering there, and he took a picture of it and sent it to me on Facebook. And indeed, Dad was very, very proud of the work that John Bergstrom and Oscar Bolt did, and many others did, on that Performing Arts Center, which is across the street from the Paper Valley Hotel. And what's interesting is that Oscar sent Oscar Bolt, or as he was known, OC is what they called him. My dad always called him Oscar, but most people called him OC. Anyway, he commissioned a book called The Art of Labor. And interesting, when I cleaned out my dad's condominium in Appleton, on the coffee table in the living room there were 3 books. One was a book of photographs of Wisconsin. One was a coffee table book about banking, photographs of banks and so on. And the third one was The Art of Labor, a book written and many photographs of the building of the Performing Arts Center in Appleton. And in that particular book was a thank you note from Oscar for my dad's participation in that work. The reason I bring those 3 books up, though, is they kind of, for me, represent a threesome for my father. Wisconsin, the land, and the importance of ecology. Banking, the importance of technology. And the art of labor. Now notice it's the art of labor. It's not just thoughtless, grunt labor. Labor to my father was to be treated as an art. And people who did labor and labored on buildings and so on, iron workers and so on, they should be raised up as artists in a certain way. And so the art of labor is a kind of spirituality. So the 3 aspects that have to be integrated in a human life are certainly spirituality, ecology, and technology. And I think we all have a very, very deep challenge in integrating and balancing these 3 parts of our lives. And the 3 books that were on the table, the coffee table in the condominium that my parents had in Appleton, kind of point to that. What I want to also point out here is it's not just the art of labor. There's the art of prayer. You see, my dad, before he died, about 6 or 7 years before he died, he gruffly spoke to me in his Navy captain voice. And he said, "Give me a prayer that will prepare me for death." This was a tall order for me. I was kind of intimidated by his request. I spent about a week. I was up in Door County with him, and I carefully wrote out a prayer. And he was very happy with the prayer that I wrote out, and he used it. He even posted it on his computer screen so he could read it more readily and more often. And so what he was doing, it's one thing to know the art of labor, but he was also now deepening the art of prayer. Here's the prayer. "Oh, good Jesus, hear me. Never let me be separated from you. You suffered so much for my sins. Forgive me and keep me free from evil, and fill me with love and joy. In the hour of my death, call me to come to you that I may praise you with all your angels and saints forever and ever. Amen." That was the prayer. And I know that he prayed it the last week of his life, the last time I gave him communion. up in Door County at his home. He prayed that prayer before he received communion. And so he was practicing the presence of God and discovering the art of prayer. And the art of prayer really is connected to the art of labor. You think of Saint Benedict and his rule, where he talks about ora et labora, prayer and work. So having sought God and having this deeper encounter with Jesus in this prayer, Dad kept growing, and he kept growing in lots of ways. And let me share one way that was particularly challenging and dramatic for me. In 2001, a friend of mine gave me a book called Day of Deceit by Robert Stinnett. Now, in that book, the thesis of that book is that there was some collusion in the United States government in order to architect the situation in Pearl Harbor. That's why it was called Day of Deceit. Of course, I was reading it as sort of just a speculative consideration of history. And very innocently, I brought it up with Dad. We were out to eat in Jacksonport and at a restaurant, and I brought it up, and he got furious with me. He said I shouldn't read books like that, and that was a silly idea, and they never would have done that. And he just shut me down, and he yelled. The whole restaurant could hear him yelling at me, and I was very grieved and embarrassed. Well, I was mostly grieved because I never went up to Door County to argue about stuff with my father and mother. That was not my goal. My goal was always to enjoy time with them, have a good time. And of course, part of having a good time in our home was sitting around the table and talking about ideas, which most of the time were welcome. But this idea was not welcome at that time. That was in the late fall of 2001. Well, fast forward to 2009. Now it's probably early September or late August of 2009. And Dad is there, and of course his health is deteriorating, but his mind is very good. And he's sitting at breakfast with me, and his caregiver had just come back from Pearl Harbor, where she saw the USS Arizona memorial. That's that big ship that sunk, and people go to that memorial to remember Pearl Harbor. And she was talking about it, and we were just having breakfast, and he looked at me, and he spoke very quietly, and he said, "Well, it seems we pulled Japan into that thing, didn't we?" And at that point, it wasn't about winning some kind of argument with my father. I wasn't even interested in talking to him about it that much. But I looked at him and I said, "Yes, Dad, it seems the best historians say so." And then he just was quiet and went on with his breakfast. He had changed his view of the narrative. And it wasn't because of that argument in the restaurant with me, for sure. It was because he was getting closer to the Lord and closer to death, I think. He died on October 5th of 2009. A few days after he died, my dad's doctor called me up, and he said to me, he said, Gus, let me tell you something. Your dad met with me the second time, it would have been the second to the last time that he met with his doctor before he died. And he handed his doctor a copy of this book, The Uganda Blessing, which is a book I wrote. You can see the foreword there is also by Father Hesperd. And he got real quiet, like he did when he was talking with me at breakfast that September morning. And he said, and the doctor said to me, you know how your dad would get really quiet when he had something important to say. He handed the doctor the book and he said, this is important. And tonight, which is his birthday, the anniversary of his birth, I have to ask myself the question, why did he think that the Bosco Project and my writing about it was important? Well, in a way, the whole purpose of the Bosco Project is to overcome isolation, to build bridges, to build perhaps even, say, coding camps, as they call them these days, where different people gather and share their ideas with each other and share their hopes for better ecology, better economics, better relationships, and connect with each other and preserve their culture. Because that's one of the taglines of Bosco, protecting people, preserving culture. The other tagline that I think is important is communication lending itself to peace. Indeed, without the kind of free communication that we experienced in our household, where even when ideas were not at first welcomed, they were welcomed later, and there was vigorous discussion. And I think that we need more vigorous discussion in our own society about many of the narratives so that we can sort out the true narratives from the false ones, like Dad was doing even to the end of his life. It's a pretty remarkable feat. An 87-year-old man, close to death, still discovering, still looking, still seeking, still praying, still engaged in his heart with the art of his own labors. Even when he couldn't physically do his labors anymore, his mind was working away. And that's something he prayed for, because from the time he was about 40 years old, he told me this: if you're over 40, pray for a happy death. I would say that my father did experience a provided for passing from this world, and it's something that I am very, very grateful for. It's also the case that we need to seek and sort out the truth as he did. That will become our compass. Please remember me as loving you. Thank you very much.